smart, he's on the phone. Kevin, give him a nudge, will you? Is he coming or not? Yeah. Yes. Oh, right. Okay, we come now then to agenda item 9. We have two speakers, Caroline Wilberforce, will you come to the table, Caroline, and Alan Carter-Jones.
Mark's not speaking. We cancelled.
Oh, Mark Hallam.
Yeah, we cancelled.
He's not coming.
No.
This item is to be introduced by Trevor Collins. Trevor, would you like?
Thank you, Chair. Before I start, can I just introduce Andrew Jones from BPS, who have acted as the Council's consultants in this case. And also, before I go any further with the application, can I just apologise for the error which resulted in an incorrect recommendation of refusal being printed at the end of this report on page 211, contradicting the correct recommendation for approval, which appears at the top of the report on page 196. I'm afraid this happened because earlier in the history of this application, when the applicants had submitted insufficient information, a report was written recommending refusal, and although additional information has now been supplied and I have written a completely new report, I failed to go back to the separate section in the electronic system and remove the reason for refusal which was drafted at that time. It's entirely my fault. I apologise for any inconvenience or confusion that it has caused. I did arrange for an addendum correcting this to be sent out on Tuesday the 23rd, the same day as the agenda. I've also made the correction on the amendment sheet, and I've also emailed directly the only two parties who made any comment on this application, that's Riverside Residents Association and Councillor Johnson. Neither of those two parties has made any response to my email. Just to remind you about the application site, it's outlined in red on this plan, immediately to the north of the allotments between Harvest Way and New Street, facing onto Newmarket Road, and slightly to the southwest of the site which you've just been discussing. This is from the original application drawings. As I'm sure you are aware, construction on site has advanced to a fairly significant stage. The building is not yet finished, but the form of the exterior of the building, including that elevation, is largely constructed as shown in this view. Section 106BA was inserted into the Town and Country Planning Act by the government in April 2013, and it allows someone against whom an affordable housing requirement is enforceable to apply for that requirement to be replaced with a different requirement. And the wording of that section says that if the affordable housing requirement means the development is not economically viable, the local planning authority must deal with the application in such a way as the development becomes economically viable. This section of the Act was repealed on 30th of April 2016, and such applications can no longer be made. This application, however, was made almost a year prior to that repeal date and must therefore be determined under the provisions which existed at that time. The application seeks to reduce the affordable housing provided on this site from 30 units in the approved scheme, which is 40% of the total, to 27 units, which is 36% of the total. In order to judge the viability case which the applicants have made, officers have, in accordance with council policy, required the submission of a residual land value assessment. Basically, in that form of assessment, the applicants are required to set out their expected revenue from the completed scheme, that's the gross development value, to indicate the development costs of building it and a reasonable profit level, and then to subtract the development costs and the profit level from the gross development value, leaving a residual value for the land. If that residual value for the land is less than a reasonable benchmark value for the land, then the scheme can be said to be unviable in commercial terms. I have set out in my report on pages 204, 205 and 206 my assessment of those 4 key elements of the assessment: gross development value, development cost and reasonable profit, and also the benchmark site value which should be attached to the land. I've also indicated the advice of our consultants, BPS. In paragraph 814 of the report, I indicate BPS's original reservations about the valuation which the applicants had put on shared ownership, but I've also indicated there that BPS subsequent advice to me has been that the applicant's assessment here is probably closer to a reasonable level than BPS had originally felt at the time of their last report. And I've also indicated in paragraph 818 on page 207 BPS's view about the question of site value. Now, the site value is an absolutely key element in this assessment, and I think it's very important to notice that BPS's judgment is that the 2.08 million benchmark which I have used in the report to assess whether the scheme is viable or not as approved, is at the very lowest end of the range of values that's likely to be the case, and benchmark value might be very much higher than this, which would make the applicant's viability case much stronger. I've also indicated on pages 208 and 209 of my report the provisions which I suggest should be inserted into a deed of variation for this application, which will allow the reduction of affordable unit to 27, but make provision for the council to claw back some of the value of those units if the actual sales values of the units rise above the level predicted in the applicant's appraisal document. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm going to call now Caroline Wilberforce for the planning to solution agreements.
Good afternoon. My name is Caroline Wilberforce from Indigo Planning, and I'm advising Luminous and will be speaking in support of the application. Luminous is a socially responsible and visionary registered provider. We own and manage 7,000 homes across Cambridgeshire with 45,000 customers. Their primary objective is to deliver and manage affordable homes within thriving communities. Therefore, it is really important to differentiate Luminous from a general commercial house builder. It's also worth noting that all of their previous schemes in Cambridge have been fully compliant on affordable housing. For example, Kaleidoscope and the Mark, which you may be aware of. However, Luminous has an obligation to make sure that the Harvest Way scheme does work financially so that they can carry on providing more affordable homes where it is needed. The external consent included 30 affordable units. However, abnormal archaeological costs on site have necessitated this application to vary in Section 106, and Luminous is now proposing 27 affordable units, i.e. a reduction in just 3, as Tony explained. Following extensive discussions, BPS, the Council's viability consultants, agreed with Luminous and concluded that the scheme is unviable with the 30 affordable units. Even with this variation in the tenure mix, the scheme would still provide a near policy compliant quantum of affordable housing at 36% available provision. 27 units are also pepper-potted throughout the scheme, and this principle is fully supported and encouraged by the Homes and Communities Agency. As Tony's mentioned, it's important to confirm that Luminous is also willing to enter into an overage agreement with the Council in the event that the sales prices achieved produce a surplus over and above what is currently anticipated, and we're happy to work with your officers to agree the appropriate wording. So to summarise, I actually paraphrase from the conclusion in the committee's report, which states, officers are of the view that the evidence provided by the applicants demonstrates that the approved scheme would not be viable with 40% affordable housing, and that the application to reduce affordable housing should therefore be allowed. I trust you can support the application today. Thank you.
Now, I just want to remind the committee and to inform the members of the public that we had the opportunity before this meeting to cross-examine the BPS representative here, Andrew Jones, and that we were talking about figures, yes, but these figures have not been released into the public domain because they are commercially sensitive. By commercially sensitive, I think it probably means that were they to be revealed, it might affect commercial judgments made by other developers to the detriment of this development, and that therefore seems to me an adequate justification for the redaction, such as does occur in the public documents. While I'm speaking, I'd like to just point out two other important matters. First of all, I think we've got to remind ourselves that with respect to the provision of Cambridge housing, we're in a very, very fast-moving context, perhaps the fastest moving, the most fluid in the whole country. We all know the rapid rate at which dwelling prices are rising. We know that land prices are changing hugely. We know that construction costs are rising way above inflation levels. So we've got elements here of a fast changing situation in which it is extremely difficult to make precise determinations of value and so on. And I think we have to accept that the judgment that is made is the best judgment that we can, given that we're fallible human beings. I also think it's very important to remember that the applicant is a social housing provider, is an affordable housing provider, that they're in the business of running a company which effectively provides affordable housing, and that they've got to make their books balance in order to do that function satisfactorily. And that is, in a sense, why they've come to us today, that on this particular scheme, they doubt its viability. And they're not in the business of countenancing loss when their business is to provide social housing as an important element of their business plan. So those are the two things I wanted to draw specifically to your attention. But are there any other matters that you wish to discuss? Councillor Tunnell.
Does that mean to say not-profit organisation?
Well, as I understand it, Luminous is a housing provider. I'm not sure I can answer that question. I'm not sure. Okay, in planning terms, I'm advised this is not a material consideration. Councillor Blanco.
Yeah, I understand they're a registered housing provider, and obviously have schemes within the city. They're already there, an example, but as I say, that's not wholly relevant. In terms of the application in front of us, we've had a few occasions where we've had to deal with viability reports and viability submissions. It's quite an onus on us within the planning committee, because there are occasions where the sort of policies that we sort of really sort of pursue as a council as a whole come into the sort of reality on the back of plan applications such as this one. So clearly we as a council fundamentally support the principle of 40% affordable housing on allocated housing sites within the city, both presently and in the future. The reality, of course, is that there has been an ability, thankfully that's being closed, but there has been an ability, even after a scheme has been given permission, for applicants to invoke this viability clause in one of the national acts of legislation, which, as I understand, is a course, once it's implemented, we have to follow fairly squarely and deal with appropriately. And as I understand it also, we are not necessarily the end of that process, because if we don't accept the viability report or recommendation put before us, I understand it goes then to the government in terms of the inspector to decide anyway. And that's an important factor in this particular case, because as I understand it, and it is, I understand it, because I'm not 100% as others may not be confident that I understand everything that I've read, but I understand, I think, the gist and the general points that I've been asked to deliberate on. As I understand it, we are basing our viability as a council, our viability assessment as a council on a different parameter than would be the case should it go further up the chain and be resolved nationally. Nationally, they resolve it on market value, and I think we deal with it on residual land value. Completely different in a Cambridge context, very important, because we understand the Cambridge context, market value has a, well, probably currently still a projected growth attached to it. So I think the residual land value issue on which this assessment is based by us and by our consultant is very important. We have to look at it, I say, fairly squarely. We have to look at the figures, we have to understand the figures and how they relate, and as objective planning members decide whether they are correct, whether they are being told give an accurate picture or not. That's clearly why we also have our own second opinion to inform us. Our own second opinion, as is alluded to in the report, suggests that we should accept this recommendation. The figures seem to be accurate, they seem to give a picture that is correct. In essence, in the practical terms of dealing with the plan application, I don't think we've got much choice other than to accept the recommendation.
I fully support that view. I have spent more hours than I care to mention trying to understand these viability assessments. And in the end, I've satisfied myself that the council has employed a consultant independently to assess the applicant's case, that consultant has confirmed that the applicant's case is a reasonable one, and that within broad parameters, it's probably from the applicant's point of view, the highest risk adjustment that they could apply for. And I think it's also important to remember that should this go before an inspector, there is a prospect that he or she might actually reduce the number of affordable homes consented in the scheme. So again, I hate to remind members, but in so many respects, our hands are tied by national law and national practice. And I think in this case, we should consent to the reduction from 40% to 36%. Caroline?
Just a question to the officer,
Yes.
and it's regarding the thresholds for that's set out in the guidelines for the developers' profit, that they reasonable profit. That's my question. So I'm not allowed to say the figures, but because it's a confidential document. But I have a figure on the paper. What is the actual guideline allowance for acceptable level of profit?
Yeah, do answer that.
I don't think there's any problem about discussing percentage figures because this is a kind of widely known and widely discussed subject. Obviously, the question of what is a reasonable profit level is one of the key elements in viability, and I think it is generally accepted that as far as market residential property is concerned, that 20% profit level is the standard which should be accepted. What's been slightly more complicated in this, in assessing this appraisal, obviously, is the mixture of market residential units, market commercial space, and affordable units, and that's why I've set out in the relevant paragraphs, which are paragraphs 8.6 and 8.7 on pages 204 and 205, why I feel that the notional profit level that the applicants have inserted in their appraisal is an appropriate one and should be regarded as acceptable.
I think we also have to bear in mind that the word profit sometimes has nasty and greedy associations, but profit does not necessarily go into the pocket of a developer per se, but may be used for investment within the company for the provision of further and better services. So I just treat that word profit with caution. Councillor Tunnicliffe.
Yeah, on this question, thank you, Chair. On this question of profit, first time I've heard 20% mentioned about this morning. I think that I have nothing against profit, but profit has to be related to risk. And if you're developing property in Cambridge, there is no risk, virtually no risk. Many industries operate on profit margins of 5 to 6%. So I'm actually quite taken aback to learn that 20% seems to be an acceptable level in the context of very, very little risk. And those two cannot be disentangled.
Yes. Chair, I'm sorry that Councillor Tunnicliffe hadn't registered this. It is set out, that is set out very clearly in my report, and I think it might be appropriate for me to ask Andrew Jones from BPS to comment on this one.
I think firstly, a correction. We're assuming a 20% profit across the board. There are different elements of the scheme that carry with them different risks. It's conventional to look at the affordable housing elements as being very, very low risk, as you suggest. It's worth mentioning that we, in looking at any development, also should consider that one of the prime risks for developers is escalating costs. And that whilst values are going up, so have costs been going up. And the development process is also subject to risks about what you might find in the ground, has been already mentioned. There have been unexpected costs incurred once actually the development has commenced. So I think in terms of looking at the risk profile that we've got across the scheme and that it's been assessed against, that we have what we would call a very generic kind of approach, which reflects market norms. I think appeal evidence would suggest that risks providers shouldn't be treated any differently in that respect. And indeed, they are required to make a profit in order to be able to reinvest that profit to affordable housing, as has also been suggested. So they're very much in line with other developments as far as we're concerned.
Councillor Smart.
So, the drawback, so I can't say the actual figure, I presume, in this meeting, the total maximum drawback we can make. But there is a maximum figure, and that will be set out in the contract that will movements and the votes Caroline speaking about. So, as I understand it, this drawback contract that we're looking to have with the developer is not something that's set out in legislation. So, can we be sure that we'll go on, or will there be any further negotiation in the future with movements?
How does the clawback work?
Thank you, Chair. The clawback will be part of the deed of variation which agrees to this alteration of the existing Section 106 agreement, and it will be entered into by the Council and the applicants, and therefore it has exactly the same status as the existing 106 agreement, which is a contract between the applicants and the Council. So that is the guarantee that the provisions of the clawback clause within it will be met.
I really do think that we've fully covered this. I also want to just restate that we had through the course of our session earlier this morning, which members were pretty able to sorry, I haven't got the microphone on. I just wanted to remind people that we had 3/4 of an hour session earlier this morning, which cross-examined Andrew Jones, and that he was able to provide us with answers. The thing is that this council has employed an independent consultant to look at the figures put forward by the applicant and to ask for him to determine whether those figures are reasonable. He has come back to tell us that they are reasonable. There is the risk that should we go to appeal, that an inspector might actually reduce the number of affordable homes payable under his viability assessment. So bearing all of that in mind, we're now going to go to a vote. Those in favour of the officer's recommendation, please. Those